Hello, everyone. I'm Noelle. I work at the River Center Branch Library, and we are so excited to have Desiree Proctor and Erica Harrell here. Desiree and Erica are the co-authors of an upcoming graphic novel called Nuclear Power that's coming out. Is it this month, y'all? The end of August?
The digital issues are out now on
Yeah.
Comixology.
Okay.
And then the trade paperback comes out in October.
There you go. Okay, so pre-order your paperback, but then go download it from Comixology. And they are here to give us the Blue Collar Girl's Guide to a Hollywood Writing Career.
Awesome. Yay. I'm going to share my screen.
And we're going to apologize for not being there in person. We really wanted to come, and maybe next year.
Yeah, hopefully. Whoops. Awesome. So Erica and I are both from very small towns in Florida. And we always wanted a career in entertainment industry, and it just seemed so unreachable to us because of where we were from and not knowing anybody in the industry. But we figured it out, and now we're hoping that we can share what we learned with y'all and anybody else that is interested in doing the same thing.
Likes torturing themselves, maybe. As was mentioned, we have a comic book that is right now coming out on Comixology, but Desiree and I have worked across a wide variety of mediums. We've done television, we've done video games for Telltale Games, as well as Skybound and other mobile game companies. And we have also worked for DC Comics and did the DC Talent Development Workshop, which is a great program.
Yeah, but of course, we didn't start off as writers. We started our careers in Hollywood as production assistants. I worked on American Gladiators, Key and Peele. We worked on Entourage. And we also made our own shorts and stuff. And that's how we got our start. But I'm sure as I wanted to know when I was first starting out, how do you even get a job as a production assistant? What are entry-level jobs that you can get in the entertainment industry that will set you up for a career as a television writer? So that's what we'll go over next. Like I mentioned, we started off as a production assistant. And how do you get a job as production assistant? Well, I used staffmeup.com when I was first starting out. And there's also a ton of Facebook groups now.
A lot of Facebook groups, I need a production assistant. There's several email groups if you happen to know somebody who is also a PA who can help you get onto an email group.
Your local film commission. When I was working I'm from this town called Oviedo, Florida, and the next biggest town is Orlando, Florida. And so I reached out to the local Orlando Film Commission, and I signed up to get on their contact list. So when productions were coming into the city and they needed a production assistant, they could just look people up by name and reach out to me. And I got some commercial work when I was still in Florida through the local film commission.
Yes.
And then of course,
also the literary agency mailroom. And this is more if you've already moved to Los Angeles and you were looking to have an entry-level job working as maybe a mailroom assistant, or perhaps sometimes a floating assistant who would cover an agent or a manager's desk. And the top 4 agencies still currently in Los Angeles are William Morris Entertainment, CAA, UTA, and ICM. And then there's a bunch of other more boutique agencies and management companies, and those, handle clients in different ways, like Verve, Kaplan, Stoller, Paradigm. Desiree and I are now, once we've gotten this far, we're repped by the Kaplan Stoller agency as well as a manager.
Yeah, and the great thing about a mailroom is, you start off the mailroom and it seems like a very simple job, just bringing agents their mail every day. But eventually you move your way up to, as Erica mentioned, a floater or an agent assistant. And once you're actually on a desk as an agent assistant, you're working directly with writers and directors and producers and talent. And you're getting to see like how business is done, how deals are made. And it's very educational, like on the job education. And if you make a good relationship there, that can often lead to a job as like an assistant to a high profile writer, which can lead to eventually a job as a writer on a show.
Yes, like Desiree mentioned, it's like the mailroom is kind of the like business almost side of things, whereas like a production assistant, you'll see how every department functions on like a show or a movie. So you'll see like how costumes works with props and how set dressing and art department like all function, as well as camera and grip and lighting. And you kind of get more of an idea of how things actually get made, as opposed to maybe some of the stuff that's like development or legal or business affairs, deals that are being made, or writers' rooms that may be staffing up.
Yeah, and then the thing about working as a production assistant, which is a bit of an unusual route for a career as a writer. I mean, it's definitely the route that we took, but it comes in a lot, very handy, because you are one-on-one with all the different departments on set. You get an idea of how much things cost. And a big part of writing, especially in television, is knowing your budget and writing to your budget. So like actually being on set and in an office, you get an idea of all of that stuff. Another like popular entry-level job is studio network page program. So this is also, if you're in Los Angeles, every studio has one, CBS, NBC, Paramount, and you work on these studio lots. A lot of it is just when you're first starting out, like you're working like the late show and you're bringing in the audience, et cetera. But it gives you a chance to meet like executives. And one of our good friends started off at the NBC Page program, and then she got a job as an assistant, one of the executives, and she worked her way up, and now she's director of current programming at NBC. So she oversees all of their television shows now, and she started off as a page.
Yes, we had another friend who did the Page program who was, aspiring to be a writer, and then she interviewed with our showrunner at the time for writer's assistant position, and they really connected over the fact that both of them had actually been pages. So they had like kind of a lot of common interests in that. So it's a very good way for networking, which is what we will segue into next.
Networking. So there's a reason Hollywood is all about who you know, because relationships are key. And how do you like form relationships with people that are in the industry? I mean, for us, it wasn't easy, because when we moved out of Los Angeles, we didn't know really anybody. So we found these groups like Scriptwriters Network, Writer Assistant Networks. We went to screenings, and now Twitter is also very popular, which is handy now because a lot of people are not meeting in person.
Absolutely. And like, when we would go do these networking meetups, it's like you wanted to make sure that you're keeping track of who you met and like perhaps where they work. And a lot of the, people that we met, maybe like 5, 6, 7 years ago are people who have also risen through the ranks like we have in different ways. Like we have friends who are now also writers on different television shows or movies. And we also have friends who were maybe working as like development assistants who are now, like Desiree mentioned, like working as like the head of current programming or the head of development at different studios and networks. And those are contacts that we're continuing to maintain.
Yeah, another great route is film festivals or conventions like this. We like our very first pitch happened from going to like a convention, and we went up to one of the booths and started talking to an executive who happened to work at Disney Animation, and we were just like, we have an idea, we'd love to come pitch it to you. And we were just nobodies, very green.
Without representation or anything. And it was like, she was very kind, and she was like, well, I can't take your pitch here, and that's not something I can do. However, handed the business card and was kind of like, make a contact outside of the convention. And then we were able to pitch to that person. And that pitch led to us getting other pitches and then eventually selling that idea.
Yeah, so film festivals, comic conventions, like volunteering is a great way. Just if you can't attend, if it's too expensive to attend, volunteering is a great way to participate in that. And also winning the festival. Winning a festival is just like a great way to get representation. We'll talk about what representation is a little bit later, but it's a good way to get noticed. And of course, your favorite phrase in Hollywood is let's get drinks, let's get coffee.
Now it's let's get a Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
No.
Let's Zoom coffee.
Yeah.
But it's a way to, when you meet people at these different events, get their contact info and then take them out for coffee or a drink, or just like set up a Zoom chat if you can, because you want to maintain those relationships. And you want to just keep following up. I mean, what Erica and I do is we have like a contact list, and we like put every single person we meet, how we met them, when we met them,
Where they work, like what projects did we submit to them, or if they wanted to read us, like, and how to do that.
Yeah. And then we keep updating it every time we reach out to them. And if we feel like we haven't reached out to people in a while, we'll check the contact list, see who we talked to last, who we need to follow up with. As Erica mentioned before, like the people that you start off with is the people that you're gonna like grow with. So if you're reaching out to people and maybe people you don't know very well, it's usually better to go to someone's assistant than to like an executive or a showrunner, because someday those people will become an executive, they'll become a showrunner. And of course, like the most important thing is to be genuine and be consistent. The contact list helps with consistency, but also if you don't genuinely like these people, don't stay in contact with them.
Yeah, because there's a lot of, a tendency for Los Angeles to be a fake place and people being fake. And we've never been like, oh yeah, we really want to stay in contact with those people that are just kind of using you or being, like awful to deal with. And so it's like we really try with our networking and with even people that we end up mentoring. This is one of the big things, is like be very consistent, but just like don't pester people, but be genuine with them.
Mm-hmm. And like we said repeatedly, like we can't emphasize how important this is. The people you meet with when you first start out are going to be the ones who help you the most. Like when Erica and I were both working as assistants to writers, and trying to become writers ourselves, we befriended an assistant that was working at CBS as an executive assistant, and she wanted to someday be a development executive. And we were trying to become writers, and she needed to get experience giving people notes, and we needed to become better writers. So we would just send her draft after draft of things that we were writing, and she would give us notes on that. And she became a better executive through that. And now she's like head of development at a big production company. And we're now working writers, and we continue to work together and develop shows with her. So like I said, like the people that you're sitting next to right now are the people that you want to maintain those relationships and continue working with.
Yes. And as Desiree mentioned earlier, we'll talk a little bit about getting literary representation. For us, like we mentioned, it's like we didn't have that when we moved out to Los Angeles. We didn't really know a lot of people and didn't really know how it works, but
we didn't even know what it was.
Yeah,
we didn't know what the difference between like an agent or a manager was. So
yeah, an agent's purpose, a literary agent's purpose, is to find you work. The agents tend to sign very established writers, and they also tend to have big lawyers and legal representation at the agencies that will then help the minutia of all of your contracts, like that you get, and making sure that like legally you're being sort of represented there on their end. Whereas a manager, a literary manager, helps writers kind of develop their voice. They're more likely to sign like unproven talent, or someone who's maybe just made a short film, or like just has a couple script samples, and they will read iteration after iteration after iteration of something that you write. That's kind of their job. They're more like day-to-day. Sometimes they can be like the shoulder that you cry on, and sometimes they can be like also out there looking for work for you as well.
Yeah, the reason that managers do this is managers, unlike agents, they can become producers on your work. So let's say they're developing an idea with you, and you end up selling that idea and it goes to series, the manager will get an executive producer credit. Whereas like agents aren't allowed to do that. So agents are more like short-term, getting you that gig that pays week after week. Managers are there for like the long haul. So a great way to get literary, like to get an agent, if you have a manager, is a manager, once they feel confident in you, can connect you with agents. Another great way to get representation is, like we mentioned before, winning a writing competition or directing fellowship. Some of the great like competitions are like the Nickel Screenwriting Competition, Screencraft. Austin Film Festival has a writing competition, and we've known people that have gotten reps from winning those competitions, and the Humanitas program. And then there's different fellowships.
Writing and directing fellowship programs, depending on what your interest could be. And these open up usually every year around the springtime. There's NBC's Writers on the Verge, Warner Brothers Television Writers Workshop, which I believe is now like morphing into like what was the HBO one. There's the Disney ABC writing program. Some of these are paid, and some of them are not. And you usually have to submit samples of your work. You usually have to write an essay, kind of put together your resume. Some of them require like letters of recommendation. It's multi-step process, but they usually open up between like, February and April of every year. And you go through like a long process of like submitting for them, but they really can help writers break in directly to a writer's room. Some of them are training programs that will like be 12 weeks long or so, and then they will like help you get on staff.
Yeah. And what's great about these programs is, like Erica mentioned, they're trying to put you directly on staff of one of their shows, and they specifically focus on television writing. And they look at not only like your packet that you send in, but they look at how many times you apply. So, if you end up applying this year or next year and you don't get in, don't feel discouraged, just keep applying, because a lot of the people that we know that got into these programs that are now working as writers, they didn't get in the first time. But like the people that run the program look at how committed you are.
Yes, they definitely note how many times you've been there. And also, just to clarify, what we mean by on staff is that most television shows that are produced have a writer's room. That's comedy and drama. And it is like a room full of people who are all there, led by a showrunner. And the showrunner kind of helps guide breaking the story for an entire season of TV. And so when you get on staff, there's different levels. It's kind of an entry level position is called a staff writer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what these programs, these fellowships by NBC and Warner Brothers, et cetera, they're specifically looking to get you that first staff writing job. And then another way to get literary representation, which Erica touched on earlier, is through your network, through your friends, executives you might know, coworkers. We got our first agent through a friend who was a writer's assistant. And that friend who Erica worked with at the time had a friend who had just been promoted to agent and was looking for new clients, and
was kind of willing to take more of a risk to sign people like us who had maybe sold something but didn't have tons of experience yet. And even our current manager was recommended to us by one of our college friends, actually. And we went to college with him in Florida, and he has kind of moved up through the industry. And he's a big horror producer and executive producer on a ton of horror movies now. And so we were like, hey, like, we're looking for new reps. Like, who do you know? Who do you like? Who do you like? Again, being like genuine, care about in this industry. And he recommended our current manager, who's actually from New Orleans, and he had been an agent for many years. So now he had transitioned to manager, and that's how we have him.
Yeah. So we're talking about getting representation, winning competitions, but of course you have to learn how to write first. And when I first moved to Los Angeles, I went to this very small film school in Florida. And when I got out to LA, I was like, oh, this film school did not prepare me for Los Angeles whatsoever. And so I decided to start taking writing courses. And I was working, 10, 12-hour days on shows. And so a lot of the courses I was taking were online courses. So a lot of these places like Writing Pad, UCLA Writing Extension, even Upright Citizens Brigade, which focuses on comedy writing. They have online courses, so you don't even need to be in Los Angeles to take these courses. But the great thing about these places like Writing Pad and UCLA Extension is they are taught by people that work in the industry. So
Not like getting theoreticals, and that was a lot in our film schools. Like it could be like this when you get out there, and we weren't necessarily, like Desiree said, prepared. And you also sometimes think you're like, is it really worth it for me to take a class? And for us, we did a sketch writing comedy class at the Upright Citizens Brigade, which was actually like on the weekends in person. And we ended up, writing a bunch of sketches. We came out of it with like a comedy sketch packet sample in addition to our other television samples. But that packet of just funny sketches ended up getting us work for like many years, just based on kind of taking a class. It's like paid for itself multiple times over.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the key is like investing in yourself is really important. And on that note, let's talk about money. So if you are thinking about moving to Los Angeles, how much should you have saved before you make this big move? Me personally, I had like 3 months worth of savings. I moved out here in 2008. There was the recession and the WGA writer's strike, so there wasn't a lot of work. I was just picking up gigs here and there. And so I was able to, I ran through that 3 months worth of savings in about 6 months. And at the time I was like, oh, I wish I'd saved up 6 months worth of savings before moving out here. And I feel like that it's kind of similar now in terms of a little bit harder to find work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I came out, with savings as well. I was also working in retail in Florida when I was there, and working through high school and through college at the same company. And I was able to transfer with my retail job to like a mall in Los Angeles. And I worked in retail full time while I was trying to either intern or be like a development assistant or get on a desk and then eventually like be a PA. But I kept that retail job like for as long as I could until I actually felt comfortable enough to stop working in retail and full-time work in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is a very smart move to make. I know a few people that have done that. They've transferred out with their jobs, even if it's just like, if you're working as a Starbucks barista, just transferring to a different Starbucks and just so you have some sort of income coming in addition to your savings, rather than doing it the very dumb way that I did it. And then another thing is should you be spending money to make your own short films, comics, etc., when you're trying to pay bills, you're working long hours? And I mean, I think it goes back to the idea of investing in yourself. I think the best thing Erica and I ever did for our career was to continue producing our own work. My second year in Los Angeles, I put on a play at the Los Angeles Fringe Festival because I could afford it. I could rent out a small black box theater. It was within my budget. It was cheaper than doing a short film or doing a comic or something. But it let people know, when I first moved to LA, that writing was something I wanted to pursue and was serious about. And it let people see my voice.
Yes. And even absolutely later than that, I've worked on features that I've helped produce and make and fund, short films, and our comic Nuclear Power. We partnered with an independent publisher, but we had to hire the artists ourselves, which means we had to decide, is it worth it? And, that's an investment that we decided to make a couple of years ago. And we were able to pay an artist, and have now a product when the trade paperback comes out in October that will be like another sample of our writing and something that we can like hand to executives, you know, on the film and on the TV side as well.
Yeah. And then film school. It's expensive. Is it worth going to film school if you want a career in the industry? The answer to that is maybe. Erica and I were both very like lucky in that the state of Florida, if you graduate from a Florida high school with a certain GPA, they will pay for you to go to a Florida university. So we were able to graduate from film school without debt. And a lot of the people that we met in film school also moved to LA and work in the industry. And like we said, we've gotten work from them. We've gotten them work.
We met each other because of that. And so in that sense, it's like back to that, it's all about who you know, the networking side of it. Yeah, it can be valuable. I mean, like there are, of course, writers' rooms that are like staffed up by entirely rooms of Harvard Lampoon people. Or it's like, oh, you went to NYU and they all stay in a little clique together. And so definitely it can be worth it on that end, but in terms of practicality, like maybe not. You can also get out there and make your own contacts, do your own thing.
Take own individual courses that are specifically in what you want. That'll be cheaper than spending like tens of $1,000s and potentially going into debt. And now we've talked about like kind of how you get into the industry, but going back to the writing ideas, like, well, you need to have the script that impresses people enough that they want to hire you, they want to sign you, etc. So how do you do that? So we're going to give some tips of like just some broad tips of what we use when we're developing an idea into a script.
And everyone says this one, like, write what's personal to you, like write what you know. And it's like, I feel like that was a little eye rolly when people would tell me that at the time. And I would just be like, oh, come on. But ultimately, one of the first, you know, writing samples that Desiree and I put together was a comedy. And we just had like a what if question that we were asking. It was like, what if my crazy dad married her crazy mom, even though the two had never met each other? And, you know, we had actually even not met each other's like parents at that time, but it was a what if question that we kept like building on that because we both had these wild childhoods growing up. And so both those things were very personal to us. And it became a sample that, again, has gotten us so much work over and over again because it was something that was like so intimately personal to us.
Yeah. And the comic book, that Nuclear Power, is also very personal to us. I mean, it's an alt history on the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the Cuban Missile Crisis really affected like both of our lives, even though it happened before we were born, because both of our moms are Cuban, and they, you know, my mom was living in the States when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, and in Florida, and like Cubans were being attacked there, and it's like her family kind of just had to like go into hiding. Erica's mom escaped Cuba shortly after the missile crisis.
And so she was trying to assimilate in this country where there was a lot of just hostility and things like that. And, you know, there was a sense of urgency on her part to become as American as possible, to like lose her accent, to, you know, a lot of, you know, Cuban families actually like ended up not teaching their kids Spanish. Like, I don't know Spanish that well. I can understand it, but it was just a product of her being like, everything was taken from me in that place. And so I'm not that anymore. And it was, you know, long lasting effects in both of our families, it turned out. So, and we're also just really interested in history. And like, again, it was asking those kind of what if questions. It's almost like a bit of a like improv game that you kind of keep iterating on. Like, what if the bombs had gone off? What if like the world were different? What if we had a different government? And that's kind of what we built into.
And then after, you know, you land on what you want to write about, the first thing that we do is we start with a log line. So a log line is a 1 to 3 sentence description of your story. That's, you know, you want to hook the reader's imagination. And the reason that we start with a log line, a lot of people do the log line at the end. Everybody has their own system, their own way of doing things. But the reason we start with a log line is it helps us hone in on what is unique about our story. So we'll use like nuclear power as an example. So our log line for nuclear power is: in nuclear power, a young mother leads a new American revolution 60 years after World War III reshaped the United States in order to protect her unborn nuclearly enhanced child. So it's just one sentence, but it unpacks a lot. It starts with the title, and then we get right into who our protagonist is, a young mother, and then what she's doing. She's leading a new American revolution. So you're letting the audience know this is gonna be a military story. And then you say 60 years after World War III reshaped the United States. And you're like, okay, that cues you into it's alt history. And then it's like goes back into what she's doing in order to protect her unborn nuclearly enhanced child. Science fiction. So
Yes,
this one
as well as stakes. It's like this is her personal stakes. It's all within that sentence.
Yeah. It tells you exactly like what the tone is, who your lead character is, what the stakes are, and kind of what the world is.
Yeah, because people are always like, what's your elevator pitch? Or like, what's your thing? And it's like, if you can tell people your log line, that's kind of what they're getting at when they ask for that kind of like quick introduction to, you know, what your idea is. Who am I following? Why do I care? And where does it take place?
Mm-hmm. The next thing we do is character sheets for each of our main characters. And character sheets like help you hone in on what's unique about your character, including their character flaws. And a good character flaw can help add stakes to your story. I mean, I feel like everybody's seen Star Wars. Star Wars, the first one, A New Hope, is a great example of this. Han Solo's big character flaw was his gambling debts. And at a pivotal moment in the story where the Empire is approaching Yavin, there's going to be a big battle. He leaves when these people need him the most because his concern is paying off this gambling debt. And of course, at the end, as we all know, he comes back in and helps like Luke save the day, but it really like raised the stakes of that moment. Another thing we like to include on our character sheets is like the character's ambition versus the character's ultimate story goal. And these two things should be in conflict because it adds dramatic tension. For example, in our comic book, our main character's ambition is to have a family, but the goal in the story is to overthrow the government, which of course makes her target. Yeah. Puts her at risk quite a lot. So will she achieve her ambition? I'll have to read and find out. And then what we also do this is all before we even start writing our script, we write out the rules of the world. So if you're writing about a specific real world culture, you want to do research. For example, Erica and I are writing on this new show for Disney Channel right now, and it's about a Mexican-American family and it involves a lot of like lucha libre. And so we're from Florida, so we already watched a ton of WWE. We already knew about American wrestling. So that was very helpful, but we went and we watched documentaries on lucha libre
and history books on Mexico and Mexican culture and the like Aztec, and Mayan, empires. Like, what can we, bring to our writer's room that may be like inspirational or even funny? Like, can we tell like a funny story about what happened to our families, even if they're not Mexican American, that like then we can adapt and like make culturally relevant to the show.
Mm-hmm. But your world might have like supernatural beings, and what are the powers of these supernatural beings? Like our comic Nuclear Power has supernatural beings in it, and we had very specific powers
in mind. And because it's called Nuclear Power, it was like, should their powers be enhanced by like what would really happen potentially if like a nuclear bomb went off? So we wanted to like ground their powers and not just make them, like
they could fly or something. Like,
yeah, that like didn't really make sense. And like, what specifically are their limitations? So then we know like whatever scene we're in, it's like the character can do these things, but they definitely cannot do these, because you just don't want to spiral out of control with like wild things that are happening.
Yeah. And if you're creating your own world, like Star Wars is a good example, what are the rules for existing and moving around in that world? So these are just good things to know before you even like start writing the script. And script writing is all about iteration. So after you write your first script, you might find yourself going back and reworking a lot of this stuff.
And like finding the people who will be able to honestly tell you what's not working about your script is much more valuable than sending someone a bunch of your writing and then being like, it's great. It's like, no, you don't want to hear it's great because, like, you know, it's not always great. Like, you need people to tell you no. Like, you need people to be like, this isn't working for me. But getting those brutally honest conversations can be tough.
Yeah. And you can use these rules of the world to build stakes. I think the movie Coco from Pixar is a good example of this. When Miguel goes to like the afterworld, like the rules of that world is if he's there for too long, he can't return back to the living world. So that adds like this timer to the movie and to his story. Is like he's got to get in there, accomplish what he's trying to accomplish, and get out before it's too late for him.
Yes.
And we'll just go into some last thoughts.
Yeah, you know, we would definitely have to, like we mentioned, like for the show that we're currently on, like kind of immerse ourselves in like the documentaries about lucha. We're reading history books, like, but we also try to read a lot of scripts and rewatch a lot of TV shows and movies. And we would advise this to anyone, like, what's the show that you love, or really what's a show that you hate and what was not working about that as well. It'll help you like learn structure and how to mimic character voices. And that's very helpful as a TV writer. Like the show we're on right now, like we did not create the show and we're coming in to basically mimic like how our showrunners are writing the show. And so that requires like flexibility and to be adaptable and, you know, just a lot of things that are really helpful because, you know, in television, it's not like everyone's a unique snowflake. You can certainly bring your own experience to it, but it's like you're also ultimately writing characters that are existing.
Another important thing is this industry is a marathon. It's not like a short race. It's not a sprint to the finish line. I think, you know, for us, for Erica and myself, there was a point where, you know, we had been out here for 8 years or something, and we'd picked up gigs here and there, writing gigs, and sold a couple projects, but our main income was still working as like assistants, and we just felt like
is this going to work out for us?
Yeah. And in hindsight, we were like actually much further ahead than we realized. And eventually we did get like staffed, and we've been working full time as writers now for a few years. And, you know, I wish I had gone back, could go back in time and tell my younger self that. I think I got a great piece of advice when I was an assistant. I was driving Keegan Michael Key to set, and he asked me like, you know, what do you want to do with your like career? And I told him I wanted to write. And he's like, give it 7 years. And he said, and I don't mean 7 years in terms of you're going to make it and be writing working full time as a writer. 7 years to just have get your first gig. And he talked about how like he used to be a theater professor, and then he like got a gig working at doing like sketch comedy in Chicago. And he was just doing sketch comedy for years and years and years before he got on Mad TV. But like once he got that live performance sketch comedy gig, he knew like that he was on the right path. So I found that to be like very, very helpful advice. It really put things in perspective for me at the time.
Absolutely. And checking your ego at the door. And this one is kind of like goes to those like sort of entry level jobs all the way to like us being writers. Like no one, of course, wants to move to LA and get coffee for people or lunch for people. They don't want to do it. But if people see you do a good job at those kind of menial tasks, most of the time you consistently work, and most of the time you will be thought of in promotion. And that definitely helps. And on the writing side of it, like I kind of touched on earlier, it's sort of like you have to find people who will be brutally honest with your work, and you can't get so defensive about your writing. Like all day long, we're in writers' rooms, and it's like you'll pitch a joke and like two people will laugh, and you're like, oh man. Or sometimes you pitch a joke and it's like everyone in the room laughs and it gets in the script, and you feel really great about that. But you can't throw a fit every time someone doesn't like the first joke that you throw out. Or, you know, if an executive gives you notes back, it's usually like, okay, well, like, let me, even if I completely disagree with this and it makes me so angry, like, let me go and see, like, what's the note behind the note, and how can I objectively look at my writing and say, you know what, I kind of need to like go back in, to have a rethink, do this, you know, a little bit better on the next pass.
Yeah. And really also that point is like no gig is too small. You know, I think when we were starting out, we took whatever writing gig we could, if it was just writing a blog, or doing like a joke pass on somebody's script. And, you know, we've had friends who like, oh, they're like, oh, well, doing something like that, I'm like, I'm too good for that, or something. And so it ends up being like, well, you just don't work. And you can learn something on every job. So yeah.
Even like when we kind of took a sidestep and wrote video games, even though we were more passionate about comics and TV and movies, we're like, is this a sidestep? Is this going down the wrong path? Ultimately, like, it was a really hard industry to be in, but we were able to like learn a lot from that industry and learn how to like adapt and change. Like, it was definitely a learning experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but a lot of people would not have made that move. They would have thought, well, I do TV, I would never write video games. And it taught us this whole different type of storytelling, of player-driven storytelling, interactive storytelling. And it's been very beneficial. And a lot of, we ended up back on a television show that was interactive. So a lot of these worlds are like melding together, and that's not something we could have ever predicted. But
and almost like no one had any interactive experience in that writer's room. In fact, we came in as like the experts of that because we had taken, you know, a side road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you never know what job will lead you where. Pay it forward. You know, it's like people, as we mentioned, we've talked about several people that have helped us get work. I think it's important to help other people. It's instead of, rather than paying people back, I think it's better to pay other people forward. It was the first piece of advice I was given when I moved to LA. Like the first guy that got me a job was like, oh my gosh, how can I pay you back? He's like, don't worry about paying me back. Just pay it forward, get other people work. And I really took that to heart. We both like mentor with our college. As we mentioned, our film school doesn't really prepare you for LA. And so being able to go back and mentor students and prepare them for things that we weren't prepared for.
Absolutely. And even people now, because we are like, quote, on staff, and we are now executive story editors in our writer's room, like we, you know, will sometimes go out of our way to make sure that we ask the writer's assistants, who like were us like a few years ago, and the script coordinators and those support staff, like, hey, do you have a sample? Like, we'll happily read it for you. Like, we will give you notes on it if you want. Or if there's a fellowship or something that they're up for, it's like, you want a letter of recommendation, like, happy to do that too. You know, and that kind of like makes them also feel comfortable. And most of the time they're like, whoa, like most people don't acknowledge us like that. And it's like, well, that's what we would have wanted when we were in those positions.
Yeah. So as you can tell from like everything we've talked about, like a career as an artist is a struggle. It's a lot of work. And so
time consuming. Like, we've not had a weekend off, I think, this almost the entirety of this year, because we're so fortunate to have work and, you know, working in television, but we're also writing 2 features, and we're writing a new comic for Marvel, and we have Nuclear Power coming out. And that means that we most of the time wake up at like 6 a.m. and we're on the phone with each other by like 8 a.m. And then we work sometimes after work, and we work on Saturdays and Sundays. It's a lot.
Yeah, and we've been doing that for years, because when we were working as assistants, you needed to make the time to write. And so we'd work, 12-hour days during the week on set. And then on the weekends, we'd meet up and we'd write. And I remember I got my first gig when I was an assistant on a production assistant on Entourage. And so I'd have to be at work at 7 a.m. So I'd wake up at 3 a.m, write for this gig, and then like go to work. So it is, if you really want it, you really have to work for it. So make sure you want it before trying to do it.
Otherwise it's obnoxious.
Yeah.
This is how to find us. As we mentioned, we have our comic that's out on Comixology and Hoopla right now, and will be coming out as a trade paperback in October. It's published by Fanbase Press. They're an incredible indie comic publisher with really like supportive owners and amazing staff. So you can find our comic there. I'm also on Twitter.
I'm on Instagram. I don't do Twitter. And
if there's any questions, let us know.
Yeah, thank you both so much. We've got time for a couple of questions. If anybody's got one, just come on up to the mic right here.
Hey, so my question is this: when you make pitches, how do you ensure that they don't take your pitch idea and just elaborate and make it their own when you go to these meetings?
That's a great question.
That's a great question. Like, thank you so much for that. Most of the time, I mean, like it's trust-based. And now that you also have the representation of agents and managers, they are actually kind of like, they pre-give the idea to whatever executive you may be pitching to. So they've kind of like given them a soft pitch to say like, hey, are you looking in the area for something like nuclear power? It's about female protagonists. It's like an alt history take. So they've kind of like already given them a little bit of information about the pitch, like most of the time before you go in and pitch. And there is therefore a legal trail like with that happening. And we're very fortunate that it hasn't really like happened to us where somebody's like stolen our idea.
But before we had representation, what we would do is we would register all our scripts and all our pitches with the Writers Guild. And you can do it online. You don't need to be a member of the Writers Guild. So we'd pitch it and have the certificate. We obviously wouldn't bring the certificate into the pitch, but we'd at least have a record that the idea was pre-existing. And if you want further protection, what you can do is you can submit your idea and get it copyrighted by the federal government before you pitch it.
Yeah. And then also like there can be paper trails via emails and things like that as well. Like if you're like really unrepresented, you can say like, look, no, I attached this pitch or the script or whatever, and you'll have that time and date stamp too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
Hey, Erica and Desiree, Steve Andes.
Hey, Steve, how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, I know. We always get to meet virtually, right?
I know.
So thank you so much for this. Is such great stuff. One thing that, just out of curiosity, like what would you say a benefit to working as a team has been? And also maybe has there been any kind of obstacles or downsides to that? Not that you have to go into anything that was sticky between you. I don't know, but like,
we'll air all the drama.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That's another really great question. Like, I would say that, there's a lot of benefits like from us personally, but there's also benefits on the studio and network side to writing teams working together, especially in television. In TV, the writing team is basically 2-for-1. So we split a salary, which means that showrunners and the networks and the studios, they get 2 bodies, 2 brains in the room for the price of 1. So it's like a huge incentive. It was a way that kind of like would help us get on staff, especially like a few years ago when like it wasn't as common to be staffing women in writers' rooms. And, you know, on a personal level, it's like we have somebody who's just going to be very brutally honest, like we were mentioning in our presentation, you know, with each other, like what's working about the script or what's not working, what joke could be improved upon. And we'll just very much like say no to you, which then also does help in a writer's room as well, because you're already kind of used to like feedback like that.
Yeah, and it helps us take on multiple projects when there's 2 of us to split the work. But as Erica mentioned, splitting the paycheck is definitely a downside. So that certainly doesn't make things easier. And having a writing partner, generally speaking, it's like being in a relationship. So, you know, we have like a shared calendar and we block off time to write, and we have to discuss like each other's schedules. So we can't just necessarily like, unless we're going off and working on our
Individual pieces.
projects. Yeah. And, you know, before, and like I mentioned, it is like dating. Like I tried writing with a couple other people before Erica, it just didn't click. And, you know,
yeah, it's like who can be reliable, like, and that's a big one of just like, are they actually going to show up and block out those 3 hours? Like, are they hardworking? Like, you know, do you each bring different things to the table? Like Desiree is really, really strong with structure. Like she's really good at like character development. Like she's great at like doing like crazy things. Like I've even come to her and been like, I had a dream last night about weird thing, insert weird thing here. And she's like, oh, I know how we could make that work by doing this, and this, and we can get there. Whereas like, then I will make a fart joke and then people will laugh in our room.
Yes, Erica's very good with like dialogue and all these like quick remarks that I'm not necessarily like the greatest at.
Well, thanks. Last question would be, what I know you just spent the last 50 minutes talking about these important things about writing, but what would be like top 1 or 2 rules for young writers that you would just sit them down and say, this is what you have to do?
Well, this one's the worst one, is that you actually have to write. And like you have to be very consistent with it, and understand that as Desiree said, it's about iteration. It's about like doing another pass, taking a look at it again, thinking things through while not trying to overthink it. That'd be my number 1 thing.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that, because I tell this to, I know a lot of the students I mentor, is iteration is important, but sometimes they over iterate and they've been working on the same idea for a year. And at a certain point, you just need to move on, and it's better, especially when you're starting out, it's sometimes better to have a quantity of scripts, because you actually learn. I think and for us, we found that we learned better that way by moving on to a different script and taking lessons we learned from the last script to improve the next one. When Erica and I first started writing together, we set a quota. We're going to write 5 half-hour comedies this year.
Yeah.
And most of those scripts were completely unusable, but one of those scripts was the one that we still use today that still gets us work. But if we hadn't done those
other 4 yeah. And yeah. I think even before we had agency representation, we had pretty much written about 10 scripts before we had gotten our agents.
Mm-hmm. And most of them were unusable.
Yes. So it's like you're lucky, but it only takes one to then be a very useful sample and help you get work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, awesome. Anybody have one more? We have time for one more maybe, but yeah, I think we're good. Thank you, Erica and Desiree, so much. This was just really enjoyable, informative, and everybody go download Nuclear Power. Don't wait for the library to get it in. It is on order, but you don't want to wait that long. And yeah, Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.